Many years ago, I lived in the town of Oskaloosa, which is near this lake, and at that time the condition of the lake was quite awful. It was always muddy or murky green with algae blooms. It smelled bad. About 15 years ago, I mean, long after I had moved away to a different town and so forth, it was drained and renovated. And it went through a sort of a honeymoon period where the fishing was good, but I didn't bother coming back here to fish until now. So, why it was so bad, what changed, and what the fishing is like now is the subject of this video. So, roll the weird intro.
And now for a look at a decidedly different kind of life. The scrawny life.
To summarize the change in one word, that word would be plants. As you can see now, the lake is filled with curly-leaf pondweed. Before the lake was renovated, it had been stocked with grass carp, which stripped out all the plants and kept it that way. So any slight wind would stir up the mud bottom of the lake and cause it to be constantly muddy and murky. Or if the wind was calm for a day or two, the sunshine would cause an algae bloom and possibly a bloom of planktonic algae, or possibly even cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, which of course smells terrible. And at that time the lake also contained gizzard shad. Now gizzard shad are great in large river systems like the Mississippi River, but in a confined small lake like this, they consume too much of the zooplankton, which leads to an overgrowth of planktonic algae, of phytoplankton, which is, of course, contributes to algae blooms, and it could even contribute to the growth of cyanobacteria, or a blue-green algae bloom. So a real double whammy of bad ideas, grass carp and gizzard shad in a small lake. We know better now. The lake needs plants to stabilize the mud bottom, to protect it from the activity of wind and waves, and buffer incoming inflowing water that's carrying mud is also buffered by the plants and settled. The plants also take up nutrients as well as absorbing the solar energy input into the lake, which reduces the possibility for algae blooms. And curly-leaf pondweed isn't the ideal aquatic plant. There is an annual cycle to this lake, especially when there's this much of it. It can die off all at once and create low oxygen conditions in the lake as the plant matter decomposes underwater and so forth. So it's not ideal, but it's much, much better than what it was. And yes, the weed beds and so forth are inconvenient for fishermen, but fish need that habitat. The water quality is so much better, and the fishing itself is much better, even with the presence of the weed beds. You can't tell it on the video because I don't have a polarizing filter, but the visibility is incredible. It's 10 feet or so. If you look carefully here, you can see a light patch on the bottom, and then a dark shadowy shape in that patch. That's a huge bass guarding its nest. But yeah, the visibility in excess of 10 feet. So a complete change in the lake due to the presence of the plants. Now, as I was ruminating on these things and catching some the crappie and not catching those nesting bass, I heard some splashing. I kept looking over. You can tell I'm looking back and forth here at something has caught my attention on the deep edge of the weed line. And finally I saw something. I saw a tail of a large, the tail of a large fish came up. And there you can see, and in hindsight, looking back at that fishtail now, I should have realized what this was. I mean, here I am throwing a crappie fly at this thing because I had thought to myself, oh no, they've put grass carp back in the lake. You know, I saw a large fish and just immediately thought grass carp because of my past experiences here. But that's not what this is at all. Uh, and I should have realized just by the shape of what I was seeing what this was, but I didn't. And so I was paddling over toward it, throwing a crappie fly, not realizing what I was seeing. And these were, in fact, muskellunge or muskies that were spawning over the weed bed. I should have realized just by the shape of the tail right there. You can tell, but I didn't. And I mean, I don't know what I was doing casting a little crappie fly. Had it been a grass carpet, they wouldn't have eaten that either. But it wasn't until right about here, if you just look carefully in the water, wait for it a minute. Right about there, I finally saw it and realized it was two muskies, one peeled off to the side. Just look carefully. Do you see it there? About a 3-foot long muskie just cruising over the top of the weed bed there. And I mean, I was right on top of this thing before it finally decided to move off. And it even, as I backed away from it, it even followed the kayak back off of the weed bed. Amazing looking fish. It doesn't come through well in the video, but I could see the spot pattern down its flank and so forth. Just an incredible fish. Like I said, probably about 3 feet long. I'll know next time, I guess, if I see that again. Meanwhile, there was a group of bluegill and mostly crappie suspended over the open water of the channel in that creek arm. And I'm not sure what they were feeding on. They were near the surface feeding on something. I didn't see any midges or other insects hatching. There were some small minnows and stuff in the weed bed itself, but I think the wind was blowing off of that weed bed. I think they probably were feeding on muskie eggs, which wouldn't that be the creme de la creme, the filet mignon of fish food would be literal musky caviar. The way the wind was blowing off of the weed bed that the muskies were spawning over, and where the school of suspended fish was positioned, I'm guessing that's what was going on. But the wind making boat control difficult, and the fact that they were near the surface and the water was clear was making it hard for me to make a presentation to those suspended fish without spooking them. So eventually I went back to working the inside weed edge. And you can see in the distance there the dam of a silt retention pond and so forth. We're almost to the end of this creek arm. And as I was working the inside weed edge there, I caught, to my surprise, a red ear sunfish. Surprising in that this is unusual behavior for red ear at this time of year. But I wasn't paying close attention, but I didn't see anything like aquatic snails or anything in the water here. It's hard to tell with the amount of pondweed there was, of course. But I mean, I would have to assume that maybe there is not a large population of snails or other things like that for the red ear to feed on, and so they were behaving more like bluegill, and they were up in the inside weed edge raiding bass nests. That's what these bluegill are doing on the inside weed edge. They're raiding bass nests. That's why the bass has to guard the nest. So I began just going around the rest of the lake, working my way up some of the other creek arms and so forth, hoping to, or casting to the inside weed edge where the bass were nesting and hoping to catch another red ear sunfish and just, learn something about the population, why they were working the inside weed edge, what the size structure of the population was like, and so forth.
I keep losing those nesting bass. I'd hook them better if I used my jig fly, but I wanted to catch another red ear, so I stuck with the little panfish fly. There's a bass. So hopefully I don't lose him. Some pressure on him here. Oh, he's in the weeds. Into the weeds. There we go. That's not a bad fish for a 3-weight.
I could see a red ear lurking around this bass's nest, but I had gotten too close, and along with some bluegill, they had all seen me and gone into hiding.
Alright, big bass on the 3-weight tiny panfish fly. Probably gonna lose it. There's a glimpse anyway. Alright, he's in the weeds. Oh, come on. Well, there you go. Ah, there's another one. That's a decent red ear.
Now, the average size of the bluegill in this lake was probably right around 8 inches or so. Pretty typical for an Iowa lake. Nothing spectacular about the bluegill population, and likewise the bass. Uh, Pretty average for what we see in Iowa in a lake this size. Uh, I don't know, probably. I did see some very large bass guarding the nest, in excess of 20 inches, some real tanks. But the vast majority of the population is sort of in this 15 to 16 inch range. Nothing spectacular, pretty typical for southern Iowa. All good musky bait. But the red ear I caught were all in the 9-inch range, and they were all pure red ear, just regular pure strain red ear, not red ear bluegill hybrids. And in a lot of cases, in a lot of lakes that contain both, the two species hybridize after a few years, and those hybrids kind of become the dominant panfish. But in this case, no, or at least none that I saw. So it's interesting, perhaps it has something to do with the pondweed or something. There's something that's separating the bluegill and the red ear spawn. And so I'm going to come back. This is going to become my go-to lake for the red ear spawn in June, and just investigate a little bit further what's going on here, what the maximum size of the population and why they're not hybridizing would be questions that could be answered in June. So we'll check back in then.